Hi, I'm Christy Simons, and I'm the Global Semiconductor Center of Excellence leader for Deloitte. And I'm joined here today by a couple of our tax leaders, Kristana and Chad, to talk about semiconductor industry trends as well as the tax implications and the legislation. There's been a significant increase in manufacturing or companies wanting to build manufacturing capabilities across the globe, but in particular in the US. Given the national and economic concerns which drove legislation, the approval of the CHIPS Act. And as a result of that, that is going to increase funding for US semiconductor companies to build new fabs, which also, there's also an investment tax credit associated with that. So maybe Chad, you can share a little bit more about how US semiconductor companies can think about this.
The CHIPS Act is a great opportunity for semiconductor manufacturers or semiconductor equipment manufacturers. It fits in both ends of the industry. And it's an opportunity for them to get additional funding to support what they would probably want to do in their businesses anyway, right? This is a capital expenditure intensive industry. But that's just the CHIPS Act is important, it's critical to the industry, but it's a small piece of the overall incentive pie. If we think about putting a new manufacturing facility somewhere in the United States, but we're going to look at state, local, business, industry conditions, and it'll be part of a holistic process.
We think frequently about income tax, at least initially, right? But from a state and local perspective, the state tax burden for most businesses, and certainly for capital-intensive businesses, is can be more focused on property tax, indirect taxes, non-income taxes. So there's opportunity for, in the credits and incentives area, for additional statutory credits and incentives and training grants that are not just income tax focused.
One thing that I've seen, and working on a couple of big site selection projects, is it goes as far as utilities, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think it actually helps U.S. companies in particular become more competitive in the landscape of a global landscape. You know, primarily because it'll erase, the CHIPS Act alone will erase about 40% of that cost differential, which is really important. And I think as we think about the U.S. manufacturing capabilities from a national security and economic security standpoint, as well as the supply chains. Mm-hmm. I think every country is starting to think about that they want to become more self-sufficient, and that's why there's this drive from a government perspective to have local manufacturing capabilities so that they can manage their own supply chains.
Recognizing the critical dependency of your entire economy on the manufacturing of semiconductors has really changed governments' minds about the need to kind of jump in and be part of actively attracting this investment.
I mean, some of these companies, you know, when they think about building a new fab in a particular state here in the US, it's a 40, 50-year decision. Yeah. Right? It's not something that you just build and it's just, you know, a decade, but it's a long-term decision.
So it used to be fairly easy to predict what the tax consequences of a downturn might be or an increase in profitability might be. There are so many levers that go up or down that modeling, detailed technology-based analysis and projection has become key to being able to make those decisions and to make those with confidence. And a part of that is, in addition to the federal laws changing, you know, we have states that are either conforming or not conforming.
That's right.
We've got manufacturing coming potentially into new states because of some of these investments.
When companies are looking again at localizing this chip production, whether it's getting into a new line of business, whether it is some type of an expansion, or if it is going from selling the tangible personal property to selling a service, those all have significant or can have significant state tax implications. And again, it's income tax, certainly. So to the extent that you definitely want to make sure that you're modeling out the corresponding state and local tax implications, because there are some significant disconnects. States generally start with federal taxable income, but there are many things that change after that can give you very different results than you may originally have intended.
One thing that you just made me think about, one of the big challenges as we do these build outs is where do we get the money, right? This is not just it's capital equipment intensive, but it's financial capital intensive. It's hugely expensive to do that. And we've seen a lot of different models and alternative funding mechanisms to try and finance this build out. And one that I've seen is that has created new problems for me in a state perspective that I've never seen before, right? Our clients are struggling because we want to finance in interesting ways, but sometimes it doesn't work from a state tax perspective.
And the key there, and I think the theme of a lot of what we're talking about here, is that tax strategy, and definitely state tax strategy, needs to be aligned with the business strategy. So you want to make sure that to the extent that you're changing the character of a transaction because you are going into a new line of business, or because you are doing a wholesale restructuring of your structure, your supply chain, that the state tax consequences from an income tax perspective and also from an indirect perspective, that you have planned for those in advance.
So Chad, when you think about domestication, of manufacturing, how does that change the tax structure?
Yeah, it is ever changing. It is evolving continually. Right. So if you're going to change your supply chain, if you're going to make a big shift in where you're siting manufacturing or assembly or test or sales or whatever activity that you're going to move around as you're shifting your supply chain, that's going to have big implications. And you need to start working.
Think ahead,
yeah,
right? You need to plan ahead for that. What is that impact going to look like?
A couple recent projects that I was part of, one, they wanted to go live on a certain date. Mm-hmm. They had shifted the supply chain, but it take transactions that previously were not subject to state sales tax, mm-hmm. and suddenly were subject to state sales tax. Well, had they built that into their ERP?
Right.
Had they done the systems implementation necessary to get there? Mm-hmm. On the flip side, right, we moved something offshore. Well, now we've got a VAT concern.
And Chad, it goes back to a word that you used earlier, holistic, and looking at things holistically, looking at things globally, even though we are focusing on this localization back to the U.S. That's coming. It does need to be this broad view, and making sure that each entity that's involved, each cost center that's involved, each ERP system that's involved is truly being considered.
Yeah, you're going to have big multi-year impacts as you make these shifts.
Yes.
And so, as companies are building these plants and actually even their existing plants, right? How do they think about sustainability, water, energy usage? From a tax perspective.
Here again is where credits and incentives from a state and local perspective certainly becomes a critical factor. With these additional investments in property, people, equipment, new processes, and technology, it dovetails nicely with companies' sustainability initiatives, right? But you also want to make sure that you have thought in advance about a credits and incentive strategy that's going to help you essentially monetize these investments by making sure that you are securing things like these utility exemptions, sales and use tax exemptions that may exist, anything that's green energy related that could potentially reduce property tax. But that takes a concerted, defined, proactive effort that is aligned with the business strategy.
Mm-hmm. And so there's going to be data elements that you're going to need to gather for tax that you probably also want to gather for sustainability. You want to have better reporting out on how you are doing from a sustainability perspective to your stakeholders. You think that's going to be good for you as an entire company. That's going to help you with your employees. That's going to help you with your investors. Well, we want that same data.
Kristana, so as we think about talent, and the needs for the semiconductor industry, that's going to be a significant need, especially here in the U.S. and globally as well. But if we think about some of the incentives for talent and bringing on the skilled workforce, how is that impacting our clients and companies, and how should they be thinking about it, in particular from a site selection process as well?
Many states have hiring credits. If you're retraining people, there are training grants. There are credits and incentives that can impact your payroll tax obligations. So again, not just your income tax.
We're seeing a lot of focus on different kinds of credits and incentives, and it kind of goes both ways. And that site selection process, it's a little bit of the company coming to a jurisdiction and saying, this is what I need, and then saying, well, this is what we can do, and this is what we can create together. And a lot of communities I've seen have been greatly benefited by the government working very closely with the semiconductor companies to come up with new models for education. And so you are seeing a lot of credits and incentives, but you're also seeing grants going both ways. A company asking, government to give a grant to a university so that they can get the programs that they need
to STEM.
Yeah.
STEM
Yep.
When new fabs are built, it's changing the community. It's creating a lot of other businesses that go into it, as well as the chips going into various products and industries, as well as we think about energy tech, as we think about sensors that go into property, but then even the adjacent businesses that would be required for the growth in semiconductor in particular, when you think about construction or financing, and the like. What's your perspective around that?
Semiconductors are a critical sustaining technology for the entire economy.
That's right.
Right? There is not a sector or an industry that is not impacted by semiconductors. But one of the things that we've seen come to semiconductor is a trend we've seen in a lot of other industries, and that's the development of ecosystems and partnerships, right? Semiconductors are very expensive to manufacture, but they're very expensive also to design. And we're seeing more custom silicon out there than we've ever seen before. And so all of these different use cases that you were mentioning, right, in agriculture, in energy, in finance, in data centers, in my laptop, in my phone, right? And so we're seeing an evolution that's coming because of that, but it's a positive evolution. It's an evolution that's coming with new innovations, new changes, a ton of new capital build out, a lot of interest in partnerships between semiconductor companies, semiconductor design companies, and players in all kinds of businesses, because it's becoming more important than ever for players in other industries to secure their supply of the right kind of chips at the right time and the right price.
Well, with that, thank you very much. Really appreciate your time and a lot of good thoughts for our companies out there.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Yes, thank you.